Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The day had started with an almost deceptive calm at Forrester Creations, the sunlight streaming through the towering glass windows casting a warm glow over the familiar walls of the design empire. Yet beneath that golden veneer, tension simmered like molten lava waiting for a single spark. Donna, usually composed and socially astute, was pacing her office with a restlessness that was hard to conceal. She had spent the previous night going over the details, replaying conversations and scrutinizing every vague remark, every slip of the tongue that Thomas had made recently. Something about him had felt off, an undercurrent of unease that she couldn't ignore, and the more she observed, the more a terrifying pattern began to emerge in her mind. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating the volatile world of Forrester politics and personal vendettas, screamed at her that Thomas was hiding something dangerous, something that could unravel not only his career but the fragile stability of the family she had long tried to protect. She remembered the way Thomas had avoided certain topics with an almost mechanical precision, the sudden defensiveness in his eyes whenever she brought up his latest projects, and the subtle, almost imperceptible tension in his posture whenever someone mentioned Hope or Steffi, as if he were masking a secret too heavy to bear. Donna had tried to push aside the nagging doubts, chalking them up to paranoia or the natural suspicion that came with being a high-profile figure in the fashion world. But deep down she knew that ignoring this would be catastrophic. She recalled a conversation from just a week ago, in which Thomas had been unusually evasive about a design he was planning for an upcoming show, dismissing her questions with a casualness that bordered on reckless. Something about the way he had spoken, the flicker of defiance followed by the subtle avoidance of her gaze, had lodged itself in her mind, gnawing at her until she could no longer ignore it. And then came the evidence, subtle yet undeniable, almost like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, each fragment pointing toward a truth that was more horrifying than she had dared imagine. Thomas's ambition had crossed the line from relentless drive into something far more dangerous, and the consequences of his actions, if left unchecked, could devastate not just the company but the people she cared about most. Donna felt her chest tighten as she sifted through emails, project notes, and whispered office rumors, each piece adding weight to the growing realization that Thomas's recent behavior was not merely reckless but perilous, and she knew, with the sinking certainty that only comes from seeing the unthinkable clearly, that she could not remain silent any longer. She remembered the way he had lingered near Hope's office the previous afternoon, too interested in the details of her schedule, too aware of the people coming and going, as if he were mapping something out in his mind, and the chill that ran down her spine in that moment told her that this was not a simple infatuation or harmless curiosity, it was a calculated strategy, one that could have far-reaching implications if allowed to continue. Determined, Donna decided that she had to confront him, not with accusations born of conjecture but with hard evidence, meticulously collected over weeks of observation, each detail corroborating the other until the picture that emerged was both undeniable and terrifying. She rehearsed her approach, her voice, her posture, each carefully considered so that when Thomas walked into her office, there would be no doubt that she was aware, no room for his manipulations, no escape from the truth that she was about to lay bare. When he finally appeared, wearing the confident, almost charming mask that he had perfected over years of navigating family dynamics and corporate battles, Donna felt a pang of unease, a recognition of the fact that she was about to challenge a man whose cunning had often allowed him to slip through the cracks, whose charm had disarmed even the most vigilant, whose ambition had repeatedly placed him at the center of drama and heartbreak. Thomas smiled, that infuriatingly calm, assured smile, completely unaware that Donna's mind had already pieced together the full scope of his actions, that her careful surveillance and relentless questioning had brought her to a vantage point from which she could see him for what he truly was, a man whose single wrong step could ignite a chain reaction of chaos, endangering careers, relationships, and lives. As she motioned for him to sit, the subtle but unmistakable firmness in her voice betrayed none of the storm raging inside her, yet Thomas sensed a shift immediately, a tension that was different from their usual exchanges, one that spoke of confrontation, of revelation, of accountability. Donna began carefully, slowly, presenting her findings not as accusations but as questions that left little room for deception, her gaze unwavering as she watched the flicker of unease cross Thomas's features, the micro-expressions that betrayed the composure he so carefully cultivated. She mentioned the odd project notes, the unexplained absences, the curious timing of his meetings, the seemingly innocent inquiries into personal matters that, when viewed together, painted a picture far more alarming than any single incident could suggest. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, attempting to interject, to charm, to dismiss, but Donna's preparation was meticulous, her evidence precise, her determination unyielding. Every attempt he made to deflect, to rationalize, to charm his way out of the situation was met with a calm, incisive counter, leaving him increasingly exposed, increasingly aware that the game he had been playing with such audacity had come to a sudden, uncompromising end. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in as Donna laid out the final piece of the puzzle, the proof that tied together his ambitions with his recent manipulations, the actions that, if revealed publicly, would not just tarnish his reputation but destroy the trust and bonds that held the family and company together. Thomas's mind raced, searching for a lifeline, a strategy to salvage the situation, but Donna's eyes, sharp and unwavering, told him that no deception would succeed here. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice in a way that made each word heavier, more dangerous, each syllable a reminder that the moment for truth had arrived, and that his future, as carefully constructed and precariously balanced as it was, hung by a thread in her hands. The intensity of the confrontation left Thomas momentarily paralyzed, the reality of his position settling over him like a suffocating weight. Donna's calmness was terrifying in its own way, a stark contrast to the storm she had uncovered in his behavior, and he realized with a sinking dread that the consequences of one wrong step had never been clearer. She had not only exposed his recent manipulations but had also made it abundantly clear that any further transgressions would not be tolerated, that the fragile safety net of family loyalty, corporate indulgence, and personal charm that he had relied upon for so long had been irrevocably compromised. Thomas's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear, frustration, and the begrudging acknowledgement of Donna's superiority in this confrontation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he recognized the magnitude of the reckoning that had been set in motion by his own actions. Donna, sensing his internal struggle, allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible sigh, a human gesture that softened the intensity without diminishing the power of her position, and then she laid out the boundaries with crystalline clarity. Any further misstep, any attempt to manipulate or deceive, and the consequences would be swift, decisive, and far-reaching. The implications were clear, not just for Thomas's career within Forrester Creations, not just for his standing in the family, but for every relationship he had cultivated, every alliance he had relied upon, every carefully constructed facade he had maintained. Donna's confrontation was not merely a personal admonition. It was a declaration of accountability, a warning that the delicate equilibrium of power, ambition, and personal connection had shifted irrevocably. As Thomas left her office, the weight of what had transpired settled over him like a storm cloud, a reminder that even the most calculated strategies could crumble under the scrutiny of a perceptive mind, and that one wrong step, one moment of overreach, could trigger a cascade of consequences from which there might be no recovery. Meanwhile, Donna sat back in her chair, a mixture of relief and lingering tension coursing through her, knowing that she had averted a potential disaster, at least for the moment, yet aware that the drama, the high-stakes tension, and the precarious balance of Forrester Creations' power dynamics were far from resolved. She had confronted the dangerous truth, exposed the risks, and asserted her authority in a way that left Thomas shaken. But she also knew that vigilance would be required, that the unfolding events would demand careful attention, strategic thinking, and unwavering resolve. In that moment, amidst the familiar hum of the office and the distant sounds of designers moving through their routines, Donna felt the full weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her actions had protected not only the company but the people she cared about most, and that the revelation she had forced Thomas to confront would shape the trajectory of his future in ways both immediate and profound. The tension in the office remained, a subtle but undeniable reminder that one wrong step could still set off a chain reaction of chaos, and as Donna rose from her chair, ready to resume her day with the grace and composure that had always defined her, she carried with her the certainty that she had faced a storm head-on, uncovered a dangerous truth, and altered the course of events in a world where ambition, deception, and loyalty constantly collided in the high-stakes drama of Forrester Creations. Even as Thomas left Donna's office, the weight of her confrontation hung over him like a shadow he could not shake. His mind raced with all the permutations of what could come next, how the revelation she had forced upon him could ripple through Forrester Creations, the family, and even the delicate alliances he had spent years cultivating. He walked down the familiar halls, the usual hum of designers and assistants now seeming distant, almost ominous. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the building itself were aware of the storm brewing inside him. Thomas had always prided himself on his ability to navigate treacherous waters, to charm, manipulate, and calculate his way out of impossible situations, yet for the first time, he felt genuinely cornered, exposed in a way that no flattery, no clever diversion could fix. The truth Donna had laid bare was undeniable, and it clung to him like a stain he could not wash away. He tried to focus on work, to remind himself that he was a Forrester, that he had survived crises before, but each glance at the familiar sketches, fabric swatches, and design boards reminded him of what was at stake, not just his career, but the very perception of him within the family he had longed to impress, to control, and even to manipulate for his own ends. The memory of Donna's piercing gaze and unflinching voice haunted him, a relentless reminder that even the smallest misstep could ignite a catastrophe. Meanwhile, Donna returned to her own tasks, though her mind refused to settle. She knew Thomas's ambitions were dangerous, and though he had been confronted, the world she navigated was never static. At Forrester Creations, the balance of power shifted like sand with every decision, every whispered conversation, and she understood that vigilance would be required not just to protect the company, but to protect those she loved. She thought of Hope, who had been oblivious to the subtle manipulations unfolding behind closed doors, and a pang of anxiety tightened in her chest. Could she trust Thomas to behave, or would his obsession, his unrelenting need to assert himself, lead to another miscalculation? She could only hope that her intervention had been enough, yet the inkling that Thomas might retaliate, that he might attempt to regain control through more dangerous means, left her restless and cautious. Elsewhere in the building, Ridge, unaware of the private storm brewing between Donna and Thomas, was engrossed in his own world of design, negotiations, and endless familial obligations. He had sensed tension in the office, subtle cues that something was amiss, but he had no idea the depth of the danger lurking so close to home. His calls with Steffi and Hope, discussions of the next runway show, and strategies for company expansion were punctuated by moments of unease, a nagging sense that the equilibrium of the family, always delicate, was once again teetering on the edge. The juxtaposition of mundane corporate decisions and the undercurrent of personal conflict made Forrester Creations a powder keg, and Ridge, despite his years of experience, had yet to recognize the precise spark that could ignite the entire building. Meanwhile, Thomas, still reeling from Donna's confrontation, sought refuge in the familiar sanctuary of his office, slumping into his chair as though the weight of his secrets and ambitions had suddenly become tangible. He ran through every word Donna had said, analyzing her tone, her phrasing, even her pauses, searching for any hint of uncertainty, any vulnerability he could exploit. But there was none. She had been precise, calculated, and terrifyingly perceptive, exposing weaknesses he had never admitted to himself, and forcing him to confront the reality that his calculated risks had, at least for the moment, failed spectacularly. In that solitude, Thomas considered his next moves, understanding that survival required more than charm. It demanded strategy, foresight, and a willingness to push boundaries that others might fear to cross. He was determined to reclaim control, to reassert his influence, but he knew that each action carried risk, and that any miscalculation could result in disaster. Donna, in her office, glanced at the clock, noting the passage of time with a measured calm that belied the tension she still carried. She knew that the confrontation with Thomas was not an endpoint, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which vigilance, prudence, and careful observation would dictate the outcome of future events. Every movement within the office, every whispered conversation, every glance exchanged in the hallways could now carry meaning, could signal a shift in allegiance, a maneuver in a game whose stakes were higher than ever. Hope, stepping into her office later that morning, sensed Donna's intensity immediately. "Donna, you seem different today," she said, tilting her head slightly, curiosity and concern mingling in her voice. Donna forced a small smile, brushing off the comment with practiced ease, yet her mind raced through the implications of what she had discovered. She had to be careful. Revealing too much too soon could provoke Thomas or create panic. But she also knew that Hope's involvement, her awareness, could be a critical factor in preventing further escalation. The conversation that followed was delicate, balancing honesty with discretion, revealing enough to make Hope vigilant without inciting fear or rash action. Hope, for her part, absorbed every word, her natural intuition picking up on the subtleties in Donna's expression and phrasing, understanding that the danger Thomas posed was real and immediate. Across the building, Thomas began to make tentative calls, speaking to trusted allies and employees with a calm that belied his internal turmoil. Every word was carefully measured, every suggestion framed to appear innocent, yet designed to gather intelligence, to test reactions, to explore weaknesses in the networks of trust he had long relied upon. He was aware that any overt maneuver could alert Donna or Ridge, tipping the balance against him, and so he proceeded with the calculated patience of a man who had learned, often through failure, that subtlety and timing were as critical as action. As the day progressed, tension mounted. Meetings were scheduled and rescheduled, emails were read and reread, and subtle glances exchanged between colleagues hinted at undercurrents of awareness that could shift alliances at a moment's notice. Donna remained vigilant, observing not just Thomas but the broader network of relationships, understanding that in a place like Forrester Creations, even minor shifts could have cascading effects. She took meticulous notes, cataloged observations, and considered strategies to ensure that any further attempts at manipulation or deception would be intercepted before they could gain traction. Thomas, sensing the invisible watchfulness, adjusted his behavior, careful not to draw undue attention, yet planning moves in the shadows, actions designed to test limits, to probe for openings, to regain influence without triggering a direct confrontation. The psychological chess game between the two reached a subtle but unmistakable tension, each aware that the other possessed information, awareness, and the ability to act decisively. Outside the confines of the office, personal relationships added another layer of complexity. Conversations over coffee, casual check-ins, and offhand remarks became fraught with potential meaning, interpreted through the lens of recent revelations. Steffi and Hope, unknowingly caught in the web of these subtle maneuvers, continued their routines, their interactions with Thomas and other colleagues layered with unseen consequences. Ridge, despite his experience, remained unaware of the full scope, yet instinctively sensed the undercurrent, feeling the familiar pressure that something significant was shifting within the company and the family. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the glass and steel of Forrester Creations, Donna prepared for the next phase of vigilance. She knew that confrontation alone was not enough, that Thomas's ambitions could manifest in unpredictable ways, and that safeguarding the company, the family, and the integrity of relationships required ongoing attention, strategic foresight, and the courage to intervene when necessary. She glanced at her reflection in the window, the faint outlines of her determined expression mirrored back at her, a reminder of the responsibility she bore and the challenges that lay ahead. Thomas, in the solitude of his office, weighed options with a careful, calculating mind, aware that any misstep could result in irrevocable consequences. The tension was far from resolved. The drama, the danger, and the delicate balance of power within Forrester Creations were ongoing, each moment carrying the potential for revelation, betrayal, or redemption. The story, it seemed, was only beginning, and the ripples of Donna's confrontation with Thomas promised to shape events in ways that would be felt across the company, the family, and the lives entwined with both, creating a high-stakes drama that was far from finished, a tale of ambition, deception, and accountability that would continue to unfold with every step, every decision, and every moment of calculated risk. The uncertainty, the suspense, and the tension were palpable, leaving each character, each observer, and each participant aware that one wrong move could change everything. Donna had uncovered a dangerous truth, and in doing so had threatened not only Thomas's career but the very trajectory of his life, leaving a lingering question in the air. Would Thomas rise above the challenge with caution and insight, or would his next steps lead him further into peril, proving that ambition unchecked, without conscience or restraint, could destroy even the most talented, cunning, and confident individual in the unforgiving world of Forrester Creations?